Welcome to Devil's Advocate with John Caldera. My name is Ross Izard. I am the Senior Education Policy Analyst at the Independence Institute. Against everyone who has ever met me's better judgment, I have been asked to guest host John's show today while he is off at a head polishing appointment. So we're going to be talking about education because that's the only thing that I'm qualified to talk about. And we're going to later in the show have some folks from a very inspirational private school join us. But for now, I want to spend some time talking about public school choice. And to do that, and specifically to talk about charter schools, we have Dan Schaller, the Director of Advocacy at the Colorado League of Charter Schools, and Bill Kottenstette, the Executive Director at Compass Montessori Charter School in Jefferson County. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ross.
So let's start out with what charter schools are. We spend a lot of time talking about charter schools and public school choice, but I find often folks have no idea what these things really are. You hear all sorts of stuff. They're private, they're religious. We know that those things aren't true. So let's spend a few minutes just talking about what these are and what they're not.
Yes, well, thank you, Ross, for having me. So we get this question all the time, and it's great that you led off by talking about public, because one of the things we emphasize all the time is that charter schools are public schools. There is no such thing as a private charter school. But what charter schools are, they are unique public schools that are given the ability to innovate in certain key ways in exchange for being held accountable for student achievement. But because they are charter schools, they're tuition free, they're held accountable to the same standards and assessments as all other public schools in the state. They're open to all students and cannot have any sort of screen-in requirements or anything like that. But they are governed in a unique way. They are governed by the contract. So what is a charter? It is a contract. And by virtue of that, they have certain flexibilities in the area of staffing and curriculum and the mission and model that they embody. But they still have a contract with the same locally elected public school board that all other schools in the state are accountable to. So let me stop for just a second. You said a minute ago that they have to serve all the same students that traditional public schools do. They can't discriminate on those basis. And yet we hear a lot of people say that charter schools get to decide who they let in, and we kind of get the impression that these things are stuffed with upper middle class white kids who really don't need that much help. Can you just spend a few minutes talking about that? Right. So yeah, as I said, by virtue of being public schools, that charter schools are prevented from barring any students on the basis of race or ethnicity or any of those factors. And in fact, across the state, we see that charter schools are serving a higher percentage of students of color, a higher percentage of English language learners. 20 of the 80 charter schools in the state are considered alternative education campuses, which are some of the schools in our state that are serving the most at-risk students. So this notion that charter schools are not serving a representative proportion of the population of students in Colorado is just not accurate.
Well, thanks for that. And one of the things that I really like to say about charter schools is that these are not new things, right? I mean, we've had these for more than 20 years now. We've got 108,000 charter students in schools across the state, about 225 charter schools now. I mean, these are not tip of the spear, super exciting experimental things. These are part of the education ecosystem in Colorado. And so it's good to hear they are public schools. And keeping in mind that these are public school students, just like public school students who decide to go to any other public school, there's some funding issues that come along with that. And I'm hoping that we could spend some time today talking about the funding equity issues that charters face and how we might go about fixing those. Bill, maybe you can speak a little bit to the funding issues that your school has faced in the past.
Great. Thank you, Ross. Compass Montessori is a charter school that we've existed for about 17 years. We're a community charter school. And what I mean by community is we were started by a group of parents in Jefferson County who wanted a public Montessori option for their families. And so that's how we started. In those early years, funding was pretty disparate. So I can't remember what the early charter law was, but it was something like 80% of what a typical school would get would go to charter schools. Currently, state law says that 95% of the state allocation for public schools would go to a charter school.
And that's the money that the state calculates out under this black box that we call the school finance formula.
Exactly, yeah.
You guys will get 95% of that.
Exactly, so we get 95%, 5% then is shared with the district as an administrative expense. And then in the school finance formula, so there's a number, that magic number that the state comes up with. And then the state says a local community can raise an additional 25% at their discretion through mill levy overrides. And so in Jefferson County,
and what's a mill levy override? Let's just pause for one second on that.
A mill levy override is essentially asking the voters, would you be willing to pay part of your property tax through mills to finance the public education system. So in each county or at each school district, they can raise local funds up to 25% of that state formula to enhance their programs. And so in Jefferson County, we don't raise the full 25%. We still have room where we could grow. But of the mill levy override that we receive, it comes out to be about almost $1,400 a student. 2 years ago, I want to say about 2 years ago, in Jefferson County, charter schools were provided with about $250 of that $1,400. And since that time, the district has made an inspiring decision, which I'm very grateful for, to give us the full mill levy override funding on a per pupil basis. Because when you look at that discretionary money that is raised by the district, you say, how can we best distribute that out in a fair way? And from my perspective, and I think most people, when you ask them, they say, what seems fair? Well, just divide it up on a per student basis and then have that money follow the child to the school that they attend.
I think that's the way you have to do it. And I just want to pause for a second on it and say, so they're getting all of the money under the school finance formula, which is why sometimes you hear folks come out and say, charter schools already get all of the money that public schools do. But then once it comes down to those voter-approved property tax increases inside the local districts, a lot of times they just don't share them. And they don't share them really because they don't have to. There's nothing in state law that says that they need to do that. And I think the last number I saw was about $2,000 less per charter school student on average in Colorado just because of that. I mean, that works out to a huge amount of money. And on top of this, they're paying for their own buildings, which means that they're taking actual operating money out of the funds that they would use to serve students so that they can pay for having a classroom in which they can actually serve those students. So all of it comes down really in my mind to the fact that they don't have to do this. This is something that they often choose not to do. And I think that there's something on the horizon down at the state capitol that might fix that problem.
Correct. Yeah. So the League of Charter Schools is pursuing a couple pieces of legislation this session that really try to get at some core fundamental inequities that charter schools face. One of the biggest of which is, as Bill has alluded to, is this local distribution of tax revenue. Because in terms of the per pupil calculation from the state, charter schools are considered full public school students and receive the full allocation there. But we continue to see that the typical charter school student is still only receiving 80 cents on the dollar compared with their traditional public school peer, and the biggest driver of that is local distribution of mill levy override revenue. And so what we're looking at per Senate Bill 188 is to say that unless a mill was specifically passed for a program or a grade level that a charter does not serve, then the money should be distributed on an equitable per pupil basis to the children of that charter school. So Bill's situation is a perfect example where Jefferson County has taken an inspired choice here over the last couple of years to level the playing field. But there's still a number of districts across the state where that is not the case, and we estimate that the total disparity that charters continue to face in that realm is to the tune of $20 to $25 million per year.
That's a lot of money, and I mean, one of the things that boggles my mind is if we were 100% positive that charter school students are public school students under the law, and they are, it seems impossible that we would even be having this discussion. I mean, we're really talking about discriminating against folks because their parents chose to enroll them into a public school that is not the neighborhood public school that they would otherwise go to. And so I guess I'm just trying to wrap my head around where the opposition is coming from. What's the argument against this? Because I don't see it.
Right. I mean, I think some people want to say that this is a local district's discretion and they should be able to make those determinations. We come back with, well, again, these are public school students. There's no reason they should be funded any differently than anybody else, particularly when you look at the mill levy language in most of the ballots across the state. There is no explicit exclusion of charter school students. And so we feel that the money should be distributed equitably in those situations.
And on top of that, I mean, so we do have a local control provision in our Constitution, and I like that. We're all local control fans. We've also got a provision that people are less likely to talk about, which says that we've got to provide a thorough and uniform system of free public schools. Hard to provide anything that's thorough and uniform if you're not actually sharing the same amount of money amongst all of those students, in my opinion.
Correct.
Well, and I would, my perspective on it is there's nothing more local than getting the money directly into a school. And so when that money goes directly into the school, then that community is able to allocate the funds in particular ways. So when we received added mill levy funding over the last 2 years, we were able to put that money directly into programs serving students. So we were able to offer enrichment opportunities for students so that they're getting after-school tutoring in math and language. We were able to reintroduce some of our elective programs. We were able to get our teacher compensation at a much more competitive level. Because of the historic funding inequity, our funding levels, particularly around salary, was significantly below market averages in the metro area.
So your public school teachers are actually making less than public school teachers in other schools because you're not getting an equal share of the money, or you weren't at least.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the money obviously comes in and makes a huge difference. I mean, and I think that's something that folks need to understand is this money flows in and it's not spent on stuff that you don't see. It's actually going in to help the students who are going to those charter schools.
Yeah.
So I'm sold. If somebody wanted to get involved and they wanted to step in and sort of help out with this, what would you tell them to do? What should they do?
Yeah, so the Colorado League of Charter Schools website has a legislator lookup tool that enables you to just punch in your zip code and you can get easy access to contact information for your legislators. And you can reach out to your legislators that way and tell them to support Senate Bills 187 and 188 in order to equalize funding for all public school students in the state.
And where are the bills right now, just so we're sure?
Yeah, so they're in the Senate. They've gone through the Senate Education Committee and are about to head to the Senate floor in the coming days.
Great. Well, thank you both. We have Dan Schaller, the Director of Advocacy from the Colorado League of Charter Schools, and Bill Kottenstette from Compass Montessori and Jeffco. Thank you both for being here. Please check out the Independence Institute's website at independenceinstitute.org. Also go to the places that Dan mentioned earlier if you'd like to get involved. Thank you both for being here, and stay tuned. We're going to have some more folks on to talk education in just a few minutes.